You ever sit at a table, surrounded by people who share your blood, and feel like a ghost in your own home? I'm not talking about that angsty teenage, nobody gets me kind of invisible. I mean truly unseen. The kind where you speak and no one even pauses to glance up from their phones. The kind where your joy, your pain, your every trembling hope barely registers a sigh, a shrug, a dismissive smirk before the conversation rushes right past like you were never there to begin with. That was my every Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday, Tuesday night. That was my life in the Miller household. I'm Claire, the middle child. Not the precious firstborn. Not the adorable surprise baby. Just the one in between. Always too loud when I cried and too quiet when I didn't. I learned early on how easily my words disappeared into the wallpaper. My sister Tara, God, even saying her name still makes my stomach tighten, was the family jewel. She sparkled with this curated, Instagram-perfect kind of charm. Even as a kid, she knew how to suck all the oxygen from a room and make you thank her for it. Her voice was a song our parents never tired of hearing. Her tantrums, her tears, her every whim, all treated like divine revelations. My victories? They barely qualified as background noise. Like the time I won second place in the county's youth art competition, an acrylic painting of a lighthouse at dusk. I spent weeks working on it, each brushstroke a piece of my soul. When I brought it home, trembling with excitement, Tara looked at it once and said, "That's nice. Kinda dark, though. Are you okay?" And just like that, the conversation veered off to how she'd been selected to co-host the school's winter talent show. By dessert, no one remembered my painting even existed. That wasn't a one-time thing. Oh no, it was a pattern. When I was 10, I wrote a poem that got published in the local paper. I taped it to the fridge with glitter tape, hoping maybe, just maybe, someone would mention it over breakfast. Instead, my father peeled it off to hang up a flyer about Tara's dance recital. He didn't even realize what he'd done. But the part that always cut deepest wasn't just being overlooked. It was the way Tara used my silence as a canvas for her lies. Like that spring when our neighbor's tulips got torn up and Tara blamed it on me. Said she saw me outside, looking weird near the garden. I wasn't even home that afternoon. I was at the library, finishing an English project. But that didn't matter. Mom looked at me, tight-lipped and tired, and said, "Claire, we've talked about being more careful." Like that was that. No questions. No chance to defend myself. Tara got a sympathetic pat on the back. "It's hard having a sister who acts out," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. And then, because cruelty was her currency, she turned and winked. That wink still haunts me. It happened again and again. Missing cookies? Claire's been sneaking snacks. Broken vase? Claire was twirling again. I told her it was dangerous. I twirled once. Once, in second grade, during a school play. But Tara made sure the memory stuck, twisting it into something pathetic. She had this gift, you know? For turning tiny truths into damning narratives. And I, desperate for peace, aching to be liked, let her. Over and over again. But the Thanksgiving when I was 13? That's the one I still wake up thinking about. That was the year I poured my entire fragile, foolish heart into something small but meaningful: place cards. Handmade, hand-painted place cards for the whole family. It sounds silly, I know. But I'd spent weeks planning them. Little pumpkins for the adults, tiny turkeys for the kids. I even printed everyone's name in curling script, learning calligraphy from a YouTube tutorial I had to secretly stream at the library because the Wi-Fi at home was always for Tara's homework. Each one had a different quote about gratitude. I picked them so carefully, ones that spoke to kindness, to quiet strength, to the kind of family I wished we were. I even made a special one for Tara. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would melt something in her. Maybe I still believed there was something good under all that venom. Thanksgiving morning, I lined them up on the table, heart racing, cheeks flushed with the hope of being noticed. Tara sauntered in half an hour later, tossed her designer purse on the couch, glanced once at my work, and said, "Ugh, Are these supposed to be rustic or just messy? She didn't even say it cruelly. That would have almost been easier. She said it absently, like she was commenting on a crumpled napkin. Then she picked one up, the one I'd made for her, and snorted. Claire, this quote is so dramatic. Did you Google cheesy Thanksgiving nonsense or something? By the time the others came down, the cards were gone. Every single one. Mom claimed she thought they were scrap paper. Said they didn't match the good plates. We don't want to make the table look cluttered, she said while Tara sipped cider and gave me that familiar, victorious half-smile. I didn't cry. Not then. Not when Dad asked me to help stir the gravy like I hadn't just had my heart thrown in the trash. Not even when Uncle Gary clapped Tara on the back and said, "You'll be a CEO one day." I can feel it while I sat there, invisible as the placemats. I cried that night, though. Locked in the upstairs bathroom, sitting on the cold tile floor, staring at my stained calligraphy pen. I cried until my ribs ached, until I felt hollow, until I realized something that chilled me to my marrow. They weren't just blind. They chose not to see me. And something inside me shifted. Not a rage. Not yet. That would come later. But a clarity. A breaking of some internal rule I hadn't even known I was following. I'd spent my whole life tiptoeing, pleasing, hoping. And what had it gotten me? Dust. Silence. The ghost seat at the table. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. They would remember me. One day, they would remember. There's something strangely liberating about watching the world you once begged to belong to slowly collapse under the weight of your clarity. After that Thanksgiving, the one where my handmade place cards were swept into the garbage like food scraps, I stopped waiting to be chosen. I stopped hoping for applause. My eyes, once so eager for affection, began to sharpen, scanning the smallest cracks in the glossy family performance. And my God, once I started seeing, I couldn't stop. It's like I'd been walking through fog my whole life and someone finally pulled back the curtain. I could see everything now. Every false smile, every strategically timed compliment, every way my sister twisted the narrative to be the heroine in every room we walked into. And most disturbingly, I saw how eagerly my parents believed her, how much they needed to believe her, because believing me would require facing something far more uncomfortable. For months, I kept my mouth shut and my observations secret. I knew better than to speak out. Speaking out got you labeled dramatic, overreacting, sensitive. But inside, I was keeping records, mental lists of every injustice, every gaslit moment, every time I walked into a room and Tara was already in the middle of crafting a story about me that I hadn't yet heard, but was already being accepted as truth. I started slipping away in ways they didn't notice. At first, it was small, staying late after school with excuses they didn't care enough to question. Then it became routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I would walk past the cafeteria, past the noise and the slamming lockers, to a quiet corner in the guidance office where Ms. Becker kept tissues, lemon candies, and a worn leather chair that felt more like home than any couch in our living room ever had. I didn't plan on going to counseling. I was too proud for that, too used to swallowing my pain whole. But one day, after Tara told the entire senior hallway that I'd made up a story about being accepted into the advanced writing elective, when in reality, she had asked Mom to accidentally lose the form I left on the counter, I found myself standing in front of the door marked Student Support Services with my fists clenched and my throat burning. Ms. Becker didn't ask questions right away. She just looked at me the way no adult had looked at me in years, with eyes that said, "You don't have to explain it all right now. I see you." And I broke. Not in a loud way. Not the kind of sobbing that gets you sent to the nurse's office. But in quiet trembles. In that slow, humiliating trickle of tears that you wipe away before anyone notices. Only this time, I let her notice. Over the following months, that little office became my sanctuary. And Ms. Becker, God bless her, became the first adult who ever asked, "What do you want, Claire?" like my answer mattered. I started writing again, not for praise, Not to impress teachers or win contests, but for survival. Late at night, in the brittle quiet of our house, when Tara's laughter echoed from her room on speakerphone with her latest conquest, I would take out my battered notebook and bleed onto the page. I wrote poems that didn't rhyme and weren't meant to. They were raw, jagged, full of truths I wasn't allowed to speak aloud. I wrote about invisible daughters and golden children. I wrote about stolen credit and stolen birthdays. I wrote about handmade place cards and the sound of the trash can lid clanging shut. Sometimes I would look at those words in the morning and not even remember writing them. And yet, they saved me. But the poem that changed everything, the one that finally gave me the strength to act, was the one I wrote after Tara's party. It happened in early spring, a Friday night when I was supposed to be staying at Rachel's house, working on a joint history project. That's what I told our parents. That's what Tara told them too. Her version just had fewer textbooks and more vodka. I came home a day early because Rachel had caught the stomach flu, and I was worried I'd catch it before finals. I walked through the door expecting silence, maybe a movie night with Mom, maybe even time to myself. What I found was chaos. There were red Solo cups on the kitchen counter, loud music pulsing from upstairs, and 3 unfamiliar boys passed out on the living room floor. The moment I stepped in, I knew what had happened. Tara's voice echoed from the second floor, shrieking with laughter, followed by the sharp sound of glass shattering. I turned to leave, to get out before I got dragged into the fallout. But it was too late. Tara saw me. She saw the door creak open. And like she always did, without hesitation or shame, she calculated the angle, shifted the blame, and rewrote the scene in real time. By the time our parents came home, summoned by a neighbor who saw kids vomiting on the front lawn, the narrative was already in motion. Claire threw a party, Tara said, eyes wide with practiced innocence. I didn't say anything because I didn't want her to get in trouble, but she told me to keep it secret. Dad exploded. Mom cried. And me? I stood there, stone-faced, while they yelled. I didn't try to defend myself. I didn't point out that Tara had been grounded for skipping school the week before. I didn't mention the vodka bottle I saw her hide under the bathroom sink. I just watched them scream at me like I was some ungrateful, lying stranger. And for the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt power. Because I knew something they didn't. I was already gone. A few weeks earlier, while Tara had been posting bikini photos from the spring break trip I wasn't invited on, I had quietly applied to 5 colleges out of state. Not just out of town, not just across the state line, I mean gone. Far enough that a car ride would take a day and a surprise visit would never happen. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Miss Becker. I sent the applications late at night from the school library. Used my birthday money to cover the fees. Wrote essays about silence, resilience, and escape. And when the acceptance letters came in, I didn't celebrate. I printed them out, folded them gently, and slid them into the back of my poetry notebook, right next to the poem that began, "Some daughters are born to be broken. Others are born to walk away." The morning I left, there was no dramatic showdown. No tearful goodbye. I didn't even wait for graduation. It was a Wednesday in mid-June. The house smelled like cinnamon because Mom was baking her famous muffins for a church fundraiser. Tara was still asleep, her phone buzzing with notifications from a dozen people who thought she was an angel. Dad was in the backyard, yelling at the lawnmower. Just another normal day. I walked downstairs with my suitcase. No one noticed. I paused in the doorway, hand on the knob, and took one last look at the house where I'd spent 17 years learning how to disappear. I didn't feel grief. I felt release. Then I walked out and never looked back. It took 3 whole days before anyone called me. Not because they were worried. Not because they missed me. But because Tara needed help writing an apology letter to her boyfriend's parents after crashing his car while drunk. When I told Mom I was enrolled at a college in Oregon and had left for orientation, she just sighed and said, "You always were dramatic." No, I wanted to say. I was just never yours. When I stepped off the plane in Oregon, carrying nothing but one suitcase and a notebook full of unsent poems, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: air. Not just oxygen, but space to breathe, space to speak, space to become someone without being forced into the shape of someone else's expectations. That air filled my lungs like fire, and I decided then that I would never suffocate again for anyone's comfort. College wasn't easy, especially not at first. I had to work 2 part-time jobs just to keep up with rent in the shoebox apartment I shared with a girl who loved to blast indie pop at all hours of the night. I lived on rice, instant coffee, and borrowed textbooks. But I had something more valuable than comfort. I had choice. Every day, I got to decide who I was and who I wasn't. No more roles assigned to me by people who never bothered to learn my lines. I chose social work as my major not because it was glamorous or marketable or something that would make dinner conversation easier, but because I had spent my entire life watching the quiet ones get overlooked, dismissed, written off. And I wanted to be the person who reached back for them. I wanted to be the adult I had needed when I was 12, 16, 17. Someone who listened not with pity, but with belief. It didn't take long for me to realize that pain recognizes pain. My classmates were bright and passionate, but they came from all walks of life, some with pasts darker than mine, some who wore their wounds on their sleeves, others who hid them behind sarcastic smiles and meticulous academic performance. And in that rawness, I found my people. I built something slowly, something real. I started leading workshops at local shelters, helping teenagers write their own stories through poetry and prose. I volunteered in crisis counseling centers, listening to trembling voices at 3 in the morning and holding space for truths that felt too big to carry alone. I kept writing, not just for myself, but for the kids who didn't yet have the words. I wrote like my life depended on it because in many ways, it still did. I had built a new life from the bones of my old one. And then, one lazy Sunday afternoon, while sipping coffee in a faded sweatshirt with my name stitched on the tag, I saw her. Tara. Her face stared back at me from a glossy Instagram reel, all teeth and cheekbones, sitting cross-legged in some overpriced beige living room she claimed was manifested through hustle. The caption read, "From high school nobody to six-figure queen. Here's how you can become the main character in your own life." She had 200,000 followers and a blue verification checkmark, and her bio described her as a branding coach, spiritual guide, and certified life alignment strategist. I nearly dropped my mug. There she was, my sister, the same one who once called me pathetic for writing poetry, now pretending to be a self-made healer of the wounded soul. She was selling online courses with titles like Unapologetic Abundance and Rewrite Your Energy, Reclaim Your Empire. The prices ranged from $297 to over $1,200. The comments were full of praise, women thanking her for changing their lives, claiming her teachings had opened doors, repaired marriages, birthed businesses. But I knew her. I knew who she really was. I knew the truth behind the carefully curated background music, the fake vulnerability, the staged authenticity. And yet, she had somehow repackaged her manipulations into a brand. My hands trembled as I clicked deeper. Post after post, video after video. She talked about being the middle child turned mogul, about escaping her toxic upbringing, about healing generational trauma. She painted herself as the black sheep who fought her way to stardom. She cried on camera, talking about being bullied by her jealous younger sister, and used those lies to sell limited edition merch printed with phrases like "Stay golden," even when they try to dim you. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the sheer audacity of it. This wasn't just performance. It was a scam. Her testimonials were vague, unverified. Her certificates were self-issued from sites that didn't even exist anymore. And worse, in her comment section, people were starting to post that they'd never received the products they paid for, that customer service was unresponsive, that the refund policy was a dead link. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up scrolling, clicking, screenshotting. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it Glitter Lies. And then I started digging. I wasn't angry. Not really. Anger had its place, sure, but what I felt was something colder, something older. A bone-deep recognition of the pattern, the way she always danced her way into praise, always silenced the truth with a smile. But this time, she wasn't just taking from me. She was taking from people who were desperate, who were hurting, who were trying to rebuild their lives. People like the ones I worked with every day. So I collected. Quietly. Methodically. Screenshots of complaints. Back-end code from her client portal showing broken links. Statements from anonymous victims who'd lost thousands of dollars after enrolling in her VIP coaching plans only to be ghosted. Her fake press appearances, articles on shady blogs she paid to feature her. Even the podcast she claimed she'd been interviewed on? It didn't exist. She had recorded both sides of the conversation herself, using a different voice and editing the audio to sound like a dialogue. I spent months gathering every piece of evidence, backing it up on encrypted drives, printing hard copies, organizing files by date and category. Not once did I confront her. Not once did I post about her or alert anyone to what I knew. Because I understood something she never did. Real power doesn't need to shout. Real power waits. Every time I opened that folder, I remembered the Thanksgiving cards, the broken poem contests, the vodka bottle she hid behind my silence. And I smiled. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reckoning. And I wasn't in a rush. Because I knew, sooner or later, the house of cards always falls. I never expected to walk back into that house. Not after the day I left without a backward glance, not after the years spent rebuilding myself from fragments and truths they never cared to acknowledge. But when the invitation arrived, one of those saccharine group texts from my mother's recycled phone number, complete with glitter emojis and a mandatory RSVP, I felt something twist in my chest. Not guilt. Not obligation. Just readiness. They weren't summoning me out of kindness or regret. They were summoning me because they expected me to forget. Because, somehow, they believed time diluted memory. Because Tara, in her infinite arrogance, assumed that forgiveness was a currency she could demand from others without ever offering it herself. But what they didn't know, what none of them ever understood, was that I hadn't been spending these past years licking my wounds in silence. I had been sharpening them. So I RSVP'd yes. And then I began preparing. It was a cold, steel-gray Thursday when I boarded the plane back to the town I had once vowed to forget. I carried no luggage aside from a small leather folder tucked inside my satchel, worn at the corners, but perfectly intact. The folder contained over 60 printed pages, each one catalogued and timestamped, detailing the rise and inevitable fall of Tara's empire of lies. No headlines. No confrontations. Just the truth, printed in black ink and bound with paper clips. By the time I stepped onto the driveway of the old Miller house, the air was already thick with tension. The house looked the same on the outside, white siding, slightly chipped shutters, the porch light flickering like it had for the past 2 decades. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. The silence behind the front door wasn't warm. It was waiting. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. My mother was in the kitchen, dressed in her holiday apron, eyes darting between the oven and the clock as if pretending to be busy. My father barely glanced up from the living room recliner. There was no welcome. No embrace. Just the stiff pause of people who weren't sure if a ghost could still breathe. Tara emerged last, descending the staircase in heels far too high for a family dinner, wearing a dress that screamed curated imperfection, cashmere wrapped around cruelty. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Claire," she said, drawing out my name like it tasted bitter. "You made it." "I did," I replied, my voice steady, smooth. "I figured I'd see what gratitude looks like this year." The silence that followed was brittle. We moved through dinner like strangers seated at the same table by accident. The turkey was dry, the conversation drier. Tara talked about her latest retreat, hosted in a rental house she called a wellness sanctuary. My mother beamed like it was a Nobel Peace Prize. My father nodded occasionally, but never met my gaze. The kids, nieces, and nephews I barely knew, fidgeted with their forks, whispering about influencers and video games. The air was full of clinking silverware and the occasional forced laugh. Until it wasn't. It happened as Tara lifted her wine glass, tilted her head with faux concern, and said, "You know, Claire, we've been talking." The air thinned instantly. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I waited. Tara's smile widened, that practiced gleam of performance and poison. "We took a vote," she said, eyes gleaming with venomous joy, "and we've decided you're no longer part of this family." There it was. The final blow. Around the table, the others nodded, some sheepishly, others with cruel amusement. Even my mother looked away as if the cranberry sauce needed urgent attention. My father cleared his throat like the vote was just another piece of business. I looked at Tara. Her chin was high, her shoulders back. She was waiting for the collapse. The outburst. The moment where I would crack and prove her version of the story was true. But what I did next was nothing she expected. I reached into my satchel, pulled out the folder, and slid it slowly across the table, its motion slicing through the silence like a blade through silk. "In that case," I said, voice calm as winter, "you probably won't be needing this." Tara blinked, confused. Her fingers curled around the folder. She opened it. The first page showed a list of names, real names of people who had filed formal complaints against her coaching business. The second page detailed unshipped merchandise, fraudulently charged credit cards, and bounced refund requests. Then came the screenshots, the fake testimonials, the forged credentials, the PayPal disputes, the podcast she claimed to be a guest on exposed as a fake, the audio manipulated with editing software, the ghostwrit articles, the photoshopped vacation homes, even the fake charity she'd claimed donated portions of proceeds from her online courses disproved, complete with IRS documentation that the organization didn't exist. Page after page. Her hands began to shake. She flipped faster, scanning the ruin of her empire unraveling in front of our family's stunned eyes. "No," she muttered, "you don't understand. This isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice soft but full of iron. "And it's all been verified, time-stamped, cross-referenced, ready for the platforms, the legal forums, the clients you lied to, and the class action lawyers already looking into your case." The room went silent. No clinking silverware. No nervous laughter. Not even a cough. Tara's breath hitched. Her face turned pale. Her mouth opened to protest, but nothing came out. She looked around the room for support. None came. My mother's hands trembled as she set down her wine glass. My father sat stiff as stone. One of the kids whispered, "Mom, what's happening?" And for the first time in my entire life, Tara had no audience. Only silence. I stood slowly, gathered my coat, looked at each of them one by one, those faces that had once looked past me, through me, around me, and let the silence sit heavy, let it choke the air the way their dismissal once choked me. Then I walked to the door. But before I stepped out into the cold November night, I turned back once, just once, and said, "You wanted me gone. You got your wish. But don't ever forget, I left with the truth. And you'll be living with the lie." And then I was gone. There are moments when silence is louder than any scream, and that Thanksgiving, the last one I ever attended with my blood relatives, echoed longer than anything they ever said to me. In the days that followed my quiet departure, I didn't return calls. I didn't check messages. I didn't stalk their social media accounts or linger near any digital windows that might show me what they were doing or saying about me. Because the truth was, I didn't need to know. I had delivered what needed delivering. And, for the first time in years, my work was done. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about something far colder, far cleaner. Closure. And closure, I had discovered, is not always a soft hug or a heartfelt apology. Sometimes, it's a slammed door. Sometimes it's a folder full of receipts. Sometimes it's a woman walking away without flinching, while the world she once tried so desperately to belong to folds in on itself. Tara's unraveling began 2 days later. At first, it started with comment sections. Quiet ripples, followers asking why their refund emails had bounced, or why the website for her coaching program now redirected to a suspended page. Then came the screenshots. People sharing receipts, timelines, evidence. Some of them tagged her directly. Some tagged the platforms she hosted on. Others tagged lawyers, investigators, and popular creators who expose scammers for a living. Her follower count didn't just drop. It plummeted. Thousands in a single day. Brands she'd collaborated with went radio silent. The podcast she claimed to have been featured on released a statement denying ever working with her. A small YouTuber published a breakdown video titled The Truth Behind the Tara Myth, which went viral in less than 48 hours. And by Monday morning, I received an anonymous message through my encrypted inbox, an attorney asking if I would be willing to share the documentation I'd compiled for a consumer fraud lawsuit already underway. I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I opened my window, let the Oregon autumn air sweep through my apartment, and took a breath so deep it reached the parts of me that had never been allowed to breathe before. By the end of the week, her business accounts were frozen. By the end of the month, she was named in an official investigation. And by Christmas, the family group chat I had long since muted was flooded with messages that reeked of desperation disguised as concern. Claire, your sister is going through a lot right now. Family sticks together, even when things get hard. You've made your point. Don't you think it's time to come home? Home. That word used to sting. Used to spark longing so deep I'd ache in my sleep. But now, when I read it, I felt nothing. Because home, I had come to learn, isn't a place that votes you out and calls it accountability. Home isn't a dinner table full of knives disguised as cutlery. Home isn't a group of people who only remember your name when they're running out of scapegoats. Home is the people who stay when there's nothing left to perform for. And I had found mine. It's funny how time reshapes memory. How things that once seemed massive now feel like fog evaporating in sunlight. I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere between that final Thanksgiving and the first one I hosted myself, something inside me finally settled. That following November, I hosted a Thanksgiving dinner in my own apartment. Not because it was expected. Not because anyone demanded it, but because I wanted to. I invited the people who had held me when I broke down in class after reading one of my own poems aloud. The ones who shared ramen with me when I couldn't afford groceries. The professor who let me turn in an essay late because she knew I had been up all night on a crisis hotline. My coworker from the youth shelter. The barista who never spelled my name right but always made my latte with an extra shot on hard days. We didn't have fine china or coordinated place settings. We had mismatched chairs, paper napkins, and 3 different kinds of stuffing because everyone swore theirs was the best. We laughed so hard the windows fogged up. We drank cider that someone accidentally spiked twice as strong as they meant to. Someone played guitar. Someone cried over the pumpkin pie, missing a grandmother they hadn't seen in years. We passed the cranberry sauce like a sacred relic, and when someone dropped the green beans, nobody blamed anyone. I looked around that room, warm, messy, alive, and realized I had never known what Thanksgiving felt like until that night. It wasn't about the food, or the bloodline, or the performance. It was about being seen. Fully. Flaws and all. And not just seen, but chosen. A few days after that dinner, I received another message, this time from my mother. No punctuation. Just a single sentence. Your sister is in real trouble now, and we all think you've gone too far. I read it twice. Let the words sit there. Then I deleted it. No reply. No explanation. No apology owed. Because what they never understood, what they never took the time to ask, was that I didn't walk away because I wanted to hurt them. I walked away because staying would have killed me. I still write. Sometimes it's poetry. Sometimes it's stories. Sometimes it's long letters I'll never send. But now I also write for the kids I mentor, the ones who come into my office with eyes too old for their age, shoulders tense from carrying secrets no one should bear alone. I teach them how to tell their truths, how to stop begging to be understood by people who have never tried, how to build their own tables when they're tired of fighting for a seat at someone else's. And every year, on the anniversary of that final Thanksgiving, I take out the notebook I once buried at the bottom of a box, and I reread the poem that started it all. Some daughters are born to be broken. Others are born to walk away. And then I write a new line, one that wasn't in the original version. But some daughters rise and build something better from the silence they were raised in. That's who I am now. They voted me out. But I had already chosen a better family.